All right, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling nutrition research.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is, right? And we've got a great source to help us make sense of it all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This deep dive is all about a blog post by Dr. Heike Franz. It's called Peeling Back the Layers of Nutritional Studies.
I love that title, Peeling Back the Layers.
Me too. And it's so true, right? There's so much information out there about nutrition. It can feel impossible to know what to believe.
Absolutely. I mean, one day coffee's good for you, the next day it's bad.
Exactly. That's the kind of confusion we're tackling today.
I'm all ears.
So Dr. Franz, she starts with this really interesting example. She calls it the raspberry riddle.
The raspberry riddle.
Yeah, so she talks about these two studies on raspberries.
Mm.
And get this, they seem to completely contradict each other.
Uh,
Yeah, one study, it was from China. It raves about raspberry extract,
yeah.
for lowering blood pressure.
Oh, yeah.
But then there's this other study from Finland, and it finds no benefit from eating, like whole, fresh raspberries.
So, same food, totally different results. That is a riddle.
Right. And it's like, wait, what? Which one is right?
So how do we make sense of that?
Well, that's the thing. It's not really about one study being right and the other being wrong.
Okay.
It's more about understanding that even small changes in the way a study is designed, it can lead to really different results.
Ah, got it. So, like, the details matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like in this case, one study used a raspberry extract and the other used whole berries.
Right.
Plus, one study was done on rats
Uh-huh.
and the other one was on humans.
Oh, okay. Yeah, those are some pretty big differences.
Right. I mean, would you expect a rat to respond to a raspberry extract the same way a human would respond to eating, a handful of fresh raspberries?
Probably not.
Exactly. So it's like comparing apples and, well, maybe not oranges, but definitely like slightly different apples.
So you're saying we can't just look at the food in isolation?
Right. We've got to consider the whole context of the research. Like all those little details can make a big difference.
Makes sense.
Okay, so then how do we even begin to break down these studies?
Yeah.
Figure out what's reliable.
Well, Dr. Franz, she outlines a few key factors that can really influence a study's outcome, starting with the study design.
Okay, study design. So what kind of design should we be on the lookout for?
Well, the gold standard, it's called a randomized controlled double-blind study.
Okay, a randomized controlled double-blind study. Now, break that down for us.
All right, so basically, with this type of study, things get super rigorous. Like, they randomly assign the participants to either get the treatment they're testing or a placebo.
Right.
But here's the key. Neither the participants nor the researchers know who is getting what.
Wait, so even the researchers are in the dark?
Yep. And that's super important because it eliminates bias. Like, think about it. If a researcher knows who's getting the real deal, they might even unconsciously interpret the data in a way that supports what they think should happen.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so blinding everybody keeps things as objective as possible.
So that's a good sign if we see double-blind study. What else?
Sample size.
Okay, sample size. Tell me more.
The more people in the study, the more reliable those results are likely to be.
Makes sense.
Like, imagine basing your whole understanding of a diet on a study of, like, 5 people.
Yeah, not very convincing.
Right. So bigger is usually better when it comes to sample size.
This is reminding me of that detective analogy you used earlier. Like we're looking for clues.
I like it. We're nutrition detectives.
So what other clues can help us crack the case of a trustworthy study?
Transparency. Researchers should be upfront about how they collected their data, any limitations of the study, and super important, their funding sources.
You keep bringing up funding. Why is that such a big deal?
Because, as Dr. Franz points out, food is big business.
True.
Like, companies can have a huge influence on which studies even get funded, and then how those results get presented to the public.
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about it that way.
Yeah, like imagine a soda company funds a study that says sugary drinks are good for you. You'd probably want to take that with a grain of salt, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's important to be aware of who's footing the bill for the research.
Okay, so we've got study design, sample size, funding source. Anything else for our detective checklist?
One more big one. Pay attention to where the study is published. Reputable scientific journals, they have these rigorous peer review processes.
Okay, peer review. So what does that mean?
Basically, it means other experts in the field, they scrutinize the research before it gets published.
Oh, so it's like a quality control check.
Exactly. They want to make sure the study is legit, the methods are sound, all that good stuff.
Okay, so well-designed, lots of participants, transparent funding, published in a credible journal. That's a good start, right?
Definitely.
But even if a study checks all those boxes, does that mean, like, we can just apply the findings to our own lives?
That's where things get even trickier.
Oh,
Yeah, because we got to talk about individual factors.
individual factors. Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Remember those raspberry studies we talked about?
Yeah.
One used rats, the other used humans, different results, right?
Right.
Well, that highlights this idea that what works for a lab rat might not work the same way for you or me.
So how do we figure out what applies to us? That's a big question.
It is a big question, and that's what we're going to dive into next. It's all about recognizing that individual factors can really impact how our bodies respond to different foods and diets.
Okay, individual factors.
Yeah.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, think about things like your age, your genetics, your lifestyle, even existing health conditions.
Right, right. It makes sense that those things would play a role.
They really do. It's not one size fits all, you know?
Definitely not. And this reminds me of something Dr. Friends brought up about research on women's health.
Oh, yeah. What about it?
Well, specifically during menopause, she was saying it's actually surprisingly hard to find studies that focus on this stage of life.
Oh, wow. You'd think there would be tons of research on that.
Right. I mean, so many women go through menopause, but it seems like there's this big gap in the research.
And that's a problem. It means we might not have the best information to guide women's health decisions during that time.
Exactly. Like Dr. Friends mentioned that women often experience different heart attack symptoms than men.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and because of that, it can sometimes lead to delays in diagnosis or treatment.
Wow, that's a perfect example of why we need to consider those individual factors,
It
right?
really is. We can't just assume a study's findings apply to everyone equally, across the board.
Nope, not at all. And it's not just gender. Think about age, too.
Okay, age, yeah.
A diet that's totally healthy for, say, a 20-year-old could be totally inappropriate for someone in their 70s, you know?
That makes sense. So we got to be really careful about just assuming that a study's findings apply to our own lives, right?
Exactly. We need to think critically and consider all those factors.
Okay, but what about when we see multiple studies on the same topic? And they seem to contradict each other.
Ah, yes, the conflicting studies dilemma.
That could be so confusing.
It really can be. But, Dr. Franz, she offers a really helpful way to approach these seemingly contradictory findings.
Okay, I'm all ears.
She suggests thinking of those studies not as right versus wrong, but as pieces of a larger puzzle.
I like that. So instead of throwing our hands up in the air and giving
That's
up,
right.
we need to see those conflicting studies as, like, clues to help us build a more complete picture.
Precisely. It's all about looking for the bigger picture.
Okay, I'm with you. Can you give us an example of how this works in practice, like a real-world situation?
Sure. Let's talk about intermittent fasting.
Intermittent fasting, okay, yeah.
You've probably seen a million headlines about it, right? Like, it's the miracle cure for everything.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But, as always, the research is a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay, tell me more.
Some studies suggest that intermittent fasting can actually improve sleep.
Interesting.
But then other studies find that it disrupts sleep.
Wait, so which is it? Does it help or hurt sleep? I'm
Mhm.
confused.
And that's where those individual factors we talked about come into play again.
Ah, okay, so it's not so simple.
Nope. The studies that found improved sleep, they focus on people who were naturally less reactive to stress.
Makes sense. Stress and sleep, they're definitely connected.
Big time. But for people who are more sensitive to stress, especially those with higher cortisol levels, our stress hormone, intermittent fasting, can actually mess with their sleep.
So it all comes back to those individual differences.
It really does. It's not about one study being right and the other wrong. It's about understanding that different people can respond in different ways to the same thing.
That's fascinating. I'm starting to see how complex this all is.
It really is. And that leads us to another super interesting example, beta-carotene.
Beta-carotene. Okay, remind me, what is that again?
It's basically a precursor to vitamin A.
Got it.
And it's often talked about for its potential cancer-preventing properties.
Oh, right, like eat your carrots, right.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Some studies have found that at higher doses, beta-carotene can actually act as a pro-oxidant.
A pro-oxidant, what does that mean?
That means it can actually promote cancer cell growth instead of inhibiting it.
Wait, so something that's supposed to be good for you can actually be harmful at higher doses?
It sounds counterintuitive, right? But that's the thing about nutrition. It's all about the details, the dosage, the context.
So we can't just blindly follow those catchy headlines. We need to dig deeper and understand the nuances.
Exactly. And this is where Dr. Franz's emphasis on critical thinking is so important.
So how do we make sense of this? Like, how do we know how much is too much?
Well, it's not always easy, and it often depends on the specific substance and the individual.
Right. There we go again with those individual factors.
They really are key, but it's a good reminder that we need to be cautious about oversimplifying things.
Okay, so moderation is key, like with most things in life, I guess.
That's usually a good rule of thumb, but again, it's important to remember that what moderation means can vary from person to person.
All right, I'm getting that message loud and clear. Now, I'm curious, are there any other examples where this dosage thing comes into play? Where something that's beneficial in small amounts could be harmful in larger amounts.
Actually, yes, Dr. Franz, she brings up a great example that I think a lot of people can relate to. Red wine.
Red wine. Okay, now we're talking. I'm all ears.
You've probably heard about resveratrol, right?
Resveratrol, yeah, I think so. Isn't that something found in red wine?
You got it. It's a compound that's been linked to some heart health benefits.
Oh, so that's why people say a glass of red wine a day is good for you.
Well, not so fast. The research is a little more complicated than that.
Oh, how so?
Well, it turns out that the amount of resveratrol in a typical serving of red wine, it's probably not enough to actually provide those heart benefits.
Oh, really? So maybe we shouldn't be downing a whole bottle of Cabernet for our heart health.
Probably not the best strategy. Plus, red wine also contains alcohol.
Right, which has its own set of risks.
Exactly. So we need to weigh the potential benefits against the potential risks and consider the bigger picture.
Okay, that makes sense. So enjoying a glass of red wine here and there, probably fine, but we shouldn't be relying on it as a health elixir.
I think that's a good takeaway. And, Dr. Franz, she makes a really important point about this.
What's that?
She says that sometimes it's best to just put the research aside for a moment and savor the experience.
I love that. It's like, don't overthink it, just enjoy it.
Right. Like if you're enjoying a glass of wine with friends or family, focus on the connection and the pleasure of the moment. Don't get bogged down in the minutia of the health research.
Such a good point. Sometimes I think we can get so caught up in trying to be perfectly healthy that we forget to actually enjoy life.
I agree. It's all about finding that balance.
Balance, yes. Between being informed and making healthy choices, but also not letting the pursuit of perfect health consume us.
Well said. But, even as we're finding that balance, it's still important to keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Right, like those detective skills we were talking about.
Exactly. Because Dr. Franz reminds us that even when a study seems credible, we need to remember that funding can influence not only which studies get done, but also whether they even get published at all.
Oh, that's right. We were talking about publication bias earlier, weren't we?
We were. It's a huge issue. Like, if a company funds a study that doesn't support their product, they might just bury those results.
That's crazy. It's like trying to solve a mystery, but half the evidence is missing.
Exactly. So we got to be extra vigilant and look for clues.
Okay, so what kind of clues should we be looking for?
Well, we've already talked about some of them, like, did the study appear in a reputable journal? Was it peer-reviewed? Were the researchers transparent about their funding sources?
Right, right. So we're checking for solid study design, large sample size, transparent funding, publication in a credible journal, and we're being mindful of this potential publication bias.
You got it. It's a lot to keep in mind, but the more we practice these critical thinking skills, the easier it becomes.
It's like working those mental muscles.
Exactly. And remember, this is an ongoing process. New research is emerging all the time, so we need to be flexible and willing to update our understanding as we learn more.
It's a lifelong journey of learning.
It really is.
So how do we take all this information, all this amazing insight from Dr. Franz, and actually apply it to our own lives? It can feel kind of overwhelming,
Oh, I hear you. It's a lot to process.
It's one thing to understand the complexities of nutrition research in theory,
Yeah.
but it's another thing to put that knowledge into practice.
It is. It is. So where do we begin? It is a lot. Where do we even start? I think, Dr. Franz, she gives us a really good starting point.
Okay, tell me.
It's all about that critical thinking we keep talking about.
Right. Bro.
Can't just blindly accept everything we read about nutrition. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's like we have to be savvy consumers of information.
Exactly. Don't just absorb everything that comes your way. Question those headlines, dig a little deeper.
Be a detective.
Yes. And don't forget about those individual factors we talked about.
Oh, right. Like what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. So pay attention to your own body, how it responds to different foods.
So like tuning into those cues.
Yeah, like your energy levels, how's your digestion, your mood even.
Interesting.
Your body's always giving you feedback. It's like your own personal compass.
I like that. Your own personal compass.
And don't be afraid to experiment a little, you know?
Hmm.
Try different things, see what works for you.
That's a good point.
It's a journey, not a destination.
It always is, isn't it? So as we wrap up our deep dive into Dr. Franz's blog post, any final thoughts?
Just that nutrition science is always evolving. It's exciting.
It is. So much to learn.
So much to learn. And, even when we feel like we've got a good grasp on things, new research can come along and change our understanding.
That's true. And that's okay.
It is. It's all part of the process.
It is. It's about staying curious, staying open-minded.
Exactly. Embrace that uncertainty.
Embrace the uncertainty. I love that. So, to our listeners, we want to leave you with this. Now that you know how to navigate this world of nutrition research, what area are you going to explore further?
What questions do you have?
What are you curious about? Share your findings with us. We're always eager to learn from you.
And continue the conversation,
Because remember, knowledge is power.
especially when it comes to our health.
So go forth, dear listener, and become an empowered explorer in this amazing world of nutrition. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.